American English, American English, American English webinar series. Teach and learn. American English webinar series.
Welcome everyone to the fourth webinar in American English Webinar Series 7, brought to you by the American English team at the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C. Let's begin today with this great photo submitted by Ezekiel Ashalu, which shows teachers at the National Science Academy in Nigeria preparing to participate in a webinar earlier this series. We love to see teachers learning together, so please do share your webinar viewing photos by emailing them to americanenglishwebinars@yaleprograms.org. We might just feature them in the next webinar. I'm Heather Benucci, part of the American English webinar team. You also know me as Moderator Heather. Today you'll see Moderator Lauren, and welcome to Moderator Robert, who will be joining us in the chat box here to assist you during the webinar. We will be here to support you as you participate today and throughout the webinar series. Here you can see the Series 7 schedule, and our next session will be in 2 weeks on November 1st, and the title is Understanding Documentation and Draft Writing for Business English, and that will be with Benjamin Taylor. Also, we will announce this information again during the next webinar, but please do be aware that there will be a time change in the United States that may affect your local viewing time for our very last webinar in this series on November 15th. Please see the Ning announcement sections and forthcoming email reminders for more details. Thank you. As you know by now, our webinars are each 1 hour long, and they are often related to a theme found on the American English website. The Teacher's Corner section from the website shown here features resources and lesson ideas related to the month's topic. Our theme this month is media literacy. And the way for you to participate is by typing in the chat box, where you can ask questions or make comments related to today's topic. We may not be able to answer every question during the session, as there are often hundreds of teachers participating. However, there is another place to ask questions when the session ends, and that's the Ning Community for Teachers, which we'll look at in just a moment. Our presenter today will also ask you poll questions. These multiple choice and multiple answer questions will appear on the screen for you to answer. And unfortunately, some of you may experience technical problems today. We will let you know if we're having a global issue. If you do lose sound, please follow along with the caption pod at the bottom of the screen if refreshing your internet browser doesn't correct the problem. And each webinar series consists of 6 webinars, and during the series, webinars will take place every other Wednesday. Those of you who attend at least 4 out of 6 webinars will receive an e-certificate from your regional English language office or local U.S. Embassy after the series ends. And to be sure you are eligible for that e-certificate, we will ask you to submit your attendance information at the very end of the webinar. We will provide you an internet link to follow, and then you'll be able to submit the requested attendance information. And we hope most of you are already active Ning members, but if you haven't registered yet, please do join us. It might take up to 72 hours for your registration to be approved, so thank you for your patience. Here on the Ning, you'll find resources and discussion questions related to each webinar, as well as all of the webinar recordings and featured materials from past sessions. The Ning is also where you can ask the presenter questions after the webinar and live chat with your fellow community members. And before I begin, I do want to announce our upcoming English for Special Purposes Massive Open Online course, or MOOC, which is designed for non-native English speakers in science, technology, engineering, and math, also known as STEM, fields. And participants in this free MOOC will explore innovative areas of scientific study while also developing vocabulary and language skills needed to share scientific information. This course might be of interest to you or to your students. The course did begin on Monday, October 16th, but there is still time to join. It's not too late. So if you'd like to learn more, please follow the link shown here or on the chat box. And now for today's session, presenting ideas through digital storytelling in the English language classroom. In order to present ideas effectively, students need to be skilled communicators. Increasingly, communication is being carried out in a digital world. This webinar will focus on using digital story techniques as an effective way to promote engagement. Teachers will learn about various forms of digital media and how to use rhetoric successfully in the storytelling process. As a result, teachers and students alike will be able to create digital content that serves both instructional and personal purposes. And finally, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Eric Winninger. Eric is the coordinator of the Center for English Language Programs at Minnesota State University, Mankato. Prior to his current position, Eric served 2 years as a U.S. Department of State English Language Fellow in Vietnam, where he taught professional English skills to government officials and mentored English teachers in the community of practice. Eric received his Master of Education degree in Second Languages and Cultures Education from the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities in 2006. His professional interests include working with multi-level classes, designing and delivering content.
Well, hello everyone. Again, my name is Eric Winninger. I'm very excited to be here with you all today to talk about using digital storytelling in the English classroom. So we're going to get started. I'll be with you for the next hour or so. Now, many of you, if you logged in to the webinar a little bit early, you saw some lobby poll questions. The first one dealt with important components of a multimedia product, and the second, student access to digital tools. For that first one, what I noticed a lot of you said was having good visuals in a multimedia product was important. And I would agree, having good quality visuals is something that's very important. But I would also like you guys to look at giving your students a voice. Not many of you selected student voice, and I feel like digital stories are a very good opportunity to help your students have a voice in using their English and describing what's important to them. That second one, accessing digital tools, I noticed that many of you talked about your students having access to mobile devices. And so when we get to the end of this webinar, we'll look a little bit more at some resources that you can tap into to use mobile devices in the digital storytelling process. So thanks for filling out those polls. Well, today we're going to look at a few objectives. These are our goals for the webinar. The first is to explore the value of using digital storytelling in the English classroom. So I want you guys to see that it's an important tool that you can use to help your students improve their English. The second is to identify the key elements and steps of creating an effective story. So before we even talk about technology and in digital devices and software, what are the key elements to a good story? And some of you talked about that in the pre-webinar discussion on the Ning. And third, I want you to be able to choose a next step that you can take in exploring using digital storytelling in your classroom. So these are our goals for the webinar. Right up front, I want you to know, so this is something you should know, that this webinar is not a technology how-to guide. There are many technology resources available on the internet and software that you could use in the digital storytelling process, and it would be very difficult to go over all those steps in this webinar. However, in the Ning discussion after the webinar is over, we can address some of these technology how-to tutorials, and I can put you in touch with some resources that you can investigate further. Another challenge and issue that many instructors talk about is how to assess students with digital storytelling projects. So while we will talk about digital storytelling and we'll deal a little bit with assessment, This also is a topic that we can continue on the Ning discussion after the webinar is over. And right up front, I think many of you realize that there are challenges in using digital storytelling with our students in the classroom. Limited technology, limits on our time, doing something that's new. And so I want to acknowledge right up front that this can be a difficult tool to use with your classes. However, I think it's very valuable, and if you're willing to put in the effort and learn something new and troubleshoot some of the challenges with digital storytelling, it can be a very good use of your time and a good use of your students' time. All right, so those being said, let's continue. We're going to start off by looking at what is digital storytelling. At the basis, we have a story. Now, we can tell stories, we can write stories. This is something you're all very familiar with. With the digital story, we're simply adding visual and audio elements to the story. So we have our digital, and we have our storytelling. We're combining storytelling techniques with visual and audio. So that's the basics of our definition. But if we continue, let's look at what a digital story is for ourselves as teachers and for our students. There are three basic kinds of digital stories that you can use in your classroom. The first is personal narrative. The second is a historical documentary. And the third is a content area tutorial. There are other options for digital stories, but these are the basics that you can use. Well, who are making these digital stories? Some can be teacher-made or they can be student-made. So as we're going through this webinar, consider options for yourself as a teacher to make a digital story, and also how you might have your students create digital stories. How long are they? Well, they're short, about 2 to 5 minutes. With my students, I like to keep them 2 to 3 minutes. So it's a short opportunity for them to create a story using their English skills, and it goes by pretty quickly. All right, we're going to look at an example. So we've looked a little at the definition of what a digital story is. Now we're going to watch a digital story. As you're watching this video, it's about a guy named Little Joe. I want you to notice these questions. What are the visual elements you see in the story, in the video that we're going to watch? What audio elements do you notice in this story? What kind of digital story is it? The three kinds that we looked at. Which one of those is this an example of? Who is the author of the story? And finally, how long is the story? You don't need to write these down. Just be mindful of these questions as you watch our example. Here we go.
At the end of the 19th century, reform-minded Americans were worried about the effects of city living. Cities, like Baltimore, were crowded. Work was increasingly sedentary and repetitive. So, led by advocates of outdoor recreation, the nation witnessed its first health craze. In this environment, cycling rose in popularity as not only a means of transportation, but also as a form of exercise. In Baltimore, dozens of cycling clubs hosted competitions and outings. This created opportunities for businessmen like Joseph Little Joe Wiesenfeld. Little Joe was a cyclist himself who, although only 5 feet tall, gained local fame at age 15 by racing his high-wheel bicycle. In 1892, Little Joe opened a bicycle shop where he taught people how to ride. Wiesenfeld even sold a bicycle to H.L. Mencken, who later recalled how,
"Coached by one of Little Joe's salesmen, I learned to ride a bicycle."
Little Joe was not alone. By 1916, one shop owner estimated that there were approximately 80 to 90 bicycle stores in Baltimore. With success selling bicycles, Little Joe expanded his business in 1896, moving to this 3-story store that sold a wide range of sporting goods, from saddles to fishing rods. Yet Little Joe would continue to sell the product that made him famous, the bicycle. Today, new bicycle clubs and bike lanes suggest that cycling is once again rising in popularity in Baltimore. The building on the northwest corner of Baltimore and Howard Streets can remind Baltimoreans of their historic connection to the great outdoors.
Okay, welcome back everybody. So I hope you enjoyed that video. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through these questions one by one, and I want you to quickly type your answers in the chat box. So what visual elements did you notice in the story? Go ahead and type them in the chat box. Good, I see pictures, photos. Some of you may have noticed that the photos were old. This video is from the late 1800s. There was also zooming in and out, so there was some pans and some special effects with how the pictures were presented. What about that second question? What audio elements did you notice in the story? Okay, good. Old music, some recordings. There was a narrative voice, a female voice, also a male voice you could hear that was quoted. Birds chirping, bicycle wheels. Good. So these were all the media elements that were incorporated into this story. What kind of story was it? Was it a personal narrative, historical, or content area? Yeah, good. It was a historical documentary about a bike store, and specifically a man named Little Joe in Baltimore, Maryland. Good. Who was the author? Did anyone catch the author? What was her name? Good. Her name was Johanna Sheen. And she may have been a teacher. She may have been a student. She seemed like a native English speaker to me. And she was talking about, again, Little Joe. How long was the story? 1:52. Good. You guys are very attentive. So I think this was a very good example of what a digital story can be. It's very short, under 2 minutes. And this is what we're looking at when we're talking about digital stories, making these kinds of videos. Good job. So go ahead, please raise your hand. Click the raise your hand button if you think your students would enjoy and learn from building a digital story like this one. Great. I'm seeing many hands being raised, so that's a good sign. All right, we're going to continue. So our guiding question today, we're going to look at 3 points today. Why you should use digital storytelling in the classroom, how to present an effective story, and how to use digital storytelling in your classroom. We'll look at identifying some next steps. So let's get going. The guiding question that I want you to think about throughout this webinar is, how can I use digital storytelling in my classroom? What steps can you take to begin the process, maybe even baby steps, to start using this tool in your class? All right, so why should I use digital storytelling or storytelling even in the English classroom? Well, storytelling is powerful. I have a quote here by Janet Litherland, an author. Stories have the power. They delight, enchant, touch, teach, recall, inspire, motivate, and challenge. They help us understand. They imprint a picture on our minds. Want to make a point or raise an issue? Tell a story. So humans are naturally connected to stories. And many of you in the pre-webinar discussion talked about good stories that were meaningful, that you were able to connect with. So I wanted to talk to you about a study that was done in Princeton University in 2010. What happened here is researchers looked at the brain activity of a speaker and a listener. We have the speaker on the left and the listener on the right. When the speaker was telling a story, the brain activity of the speaker looked exactly the same as the brain activity of the listener. In other words, when a story is told, the brains of the speaker and listener sync up. They look the same. In a way, they're connected. So this tells me that telling a story is a good way to engage those who listen. A very interesting study. And this is important for us because we are teachers and we want to engage our students. So using digital stories is one way to engage our students, to motivate them, to help them remove the language learning barriers they face, and to prepare them for successful careers and futures. But we also want our students to be able to engage their potential audience. Sometimes their audience might be other students, sometimes they might be teachers, sometimes they might be employers. So students need to achieve academic success, develop their language skills, and to pursue future careers. And being able to engage others with storytelling will help them in this process. There's also language benefits. We're English language teachers, so we need to look at these as well. Digital stories provide an opportunity to practice language in context. So instead of only doing assignments in the book, in a grammar book, for example, those are okay, but this gives them an opportunity to practice and to use their language skills and to help them develop speaking, listening, reading, and writing skills. We target all 4 language skills with digital stories. It also gives them a meaningful and interesting task to accomplish, so it can help motivate students. And finally, it gives students repeated practice. They're able to repeatedly practice their writing skills as they get ready with their stories. And when they record their stories, they're getting to practice pronunciation and continue to practice it until they get it right as they work on their product. There's other skills that digital storytelling targets. If you were with us during the last webinar, Joe McVeigh talked about media literacy. And there are multiple literacies that are targeted with digital stories. So for example, digital literacy, which is communicating with an ever-expanding community. We are all part of a global community, and digital stories, having your students make those stories, is making you a part of that digital world. We have technology literacy and visual literacy, so understanding what a picture means and how to use computers and other technology. But we also have 21st century skills, and these we often talk about are critical thinking and soft skills. So critical thinking is the ability to not only know the facts, but be able to apply them. And digital storytelling gives us a good product where we can apply language skills. But then we also have soft skills like collaborating with future employees and coworkers. And so giving your students opportunities to collaborate is another important skill. So raise your hand if you think a digital storytelling project would be an effective way to build these skills in class. Great, I'm seeing a lot of hands. We can focus on these language skills and some of the other skills that are important for us as teachers. So we're going to move on to our second point, looking at how do I present an effective story. So if you do any Google searches or research online, you may come across the 7 elements of digital storytelling. And I think these are very important elements that we can include in our own digital stories, and we can help our students include in theirs as well. So if you have a pen and paper, of course this PowerPoint will be available to you on the resource page after the webinar, but go ahead and jot down these 7 elements. The first is point of view. The second is dramatic question. The third is emotional content. Voice. Soundtrack. Economy. And pacing. Now we'll look at these 7 elements in another example, and you'll see them throughout the rest of this webinar. But I'll give you a quick overview of what each of these 7 elements means. So point of view, we start off by looking at what's the author's perspective. So first, who is the author? Who's telling the story? And what is their unique perspective? Who is the audience? Who is the message of the digital story being directed to? And what is the purpose? So identifying author, purpose, and audience is a good place to begin when we start planning our story. Then we have a dramatic question. And this was also in the pre-webinar discussion. Some of you mentioned this. Any good story has suspense. We want to see what's going to happen next. So at the beginning of our story, we want a key question to be evident that's going to hold the viewer's attention until the end of the story. Emotional content is our third. How do you want your audience to feel while viewing and listening to your story? Usually when we watch a movie or a short video, there's some emotion that is triggered, and we want to identify that in this element. Okay, voice, I mentioned how digital stories give your students a voice, and also you as a teacher, it gives you a voice. And so when we think about your voice, everyone's voice is different. So how is your story going to be personalized to help your audience understand your story? It's a very important component. Soundtrack, as we saw in our example, there's background music, and this can trigger a lot of emotions. Music is powerful, and so we want a soundtrack or a certain type of music that's going to help us tell a good story as well. Economy is a word that we will use to make sure we're not using too many words or too many images. So we have the acronym KISS. Are you keeping it short and simple? Are you using just enough words and just enough media to tell your story? That's economy. And then finally we have pacing. What's the rhythm of your story? Is it fast or slow? Are there dramatic pauses and changes? This is another element that will give you an effective story. Okay, keep in mind that there are others that you could probably suggest, but these are the ones that we talk about often with digital storytelling. Okay, we're going to do an activity. If you guys remember from the resource page in our pre-webinar activities, I gave you a link to a student-created digital story. So we're going to watch it again. If you haven't seen it, don't worry. But when we watch it, what I want you to do is to try to identify these 7 elements in the story. And specifically, I want you to focus on these 4. Dramatic question, voice, soundtrack, and pacing. And we will look at these in a little bit, and we'll talk about them after we see the video. But now if you have a pen and paper ready, we'll watch the video and try to identify these 4 elements. All right, here we go.
I'm an Asian girl. Asian girls are small in everything. They have small bodies and small eyes. I have small eyes, but my body is not, especially my feet. My big feet are the parts of body that I'm very ashamed. When I was in Thailand, I hated to go to a shoe shop. There were many beautiful shoes. Unfortunately, it had no size for me. I wondered why shoes were made only size 5 to 7. How about a girl with a big feet like me? What am I going to wear? All the big feet wear only sneakers, no high heels or fashionable shoes. What a poor girl I am. But this problem seems to disappear when I'm here. My 8.5 is a simple size. I can try everyday shoes in every shop. I have choice more than I want to buy and to wear. Yippee! I feel really great! However, people still notice my feet. I am asked about my feet size. What's wrong with that? I'm a good girl, that's enough, isn't it? So, if you want to be my friend, please don't ask me about my feet size. That accidentally hurts me.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that video. I think it's a good example of a student-created video and something that maybe one of your students could produce. So again, you were supposed to look for these 4 elements that we identified, and we'll go over all of the elements, and then we'll see what you got towards the end. Okay, so let's look at the first element. Okay, these are some of the questions that we're trying to answer, and we're looking at the perspective of the author. So we have something called a rhetorical triangle. In any type of writing or storytelling that you do, this is a good place to begin. So our author is a girl from Thailand, maybe a teenage girl, a young girl, could be like any one of our students. So she has a perspective that one of our students might have. Her audience is people that she might meet. So in the beginning of the story, we see her maybe addressing people in Thailand. And towards the end of the story, she moves to the United States. And so the people of the United States may be her audience at that point. And her purpose is maybe to explore how stereotypes have affected her. Specifically, she's talking about perceptions of her body, her feet, and her appearance. She says traditionally, Asian women are perceived to be small, but that's not the case for her, and that's something that she explores. So that's a point of view. Next, we have the dramatic question, and you may have identified this. How is she going to live with her big feet? That's her focus. And as we go through the story, her story, we notice that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. At the beginning, we learn about her dramatic question. How is she going to deal with her big feet? And by the middle, we see that there's a turning point. She moves to the United States, and she is able to find, by the end, bigger shoe size. And so in one way, her problem is resolved. In another way, she says people still comment about her feet, and her message is, don't talk about my feet. So we see this process, this dramatic question, carried through her whole story. The emotional content, we see our author there on the right side of this picture. She's taller. She wants us to sympathize with her. So she is a unique individual who has this problem, and we too have problems, maybe things that we're embarrassed about, and so she wants us to sympathize with that feeling of being embarrassed. I think it's a good example, this video, because we get to see her voice. Her English isn't perfect, but we can see that she's made a very good effort in this video, and we can only imagine that she's improved her confidence a lot in making this video. At the beginning, we see that she's embarrassed. She's embarrassed about the problem that she has. And by the end, we see that she gets to a place of acceptance. And you can tell this in how she gives her narration. So just like with your students, sometimes it's not enough just to speak in English. We want them to speak with a certain emotion or a certain feeling. And so this is a good opportunity to see how we sound with those different feelings. The soundtrack, you may have noticed, is quirky and playful. Certainly by the end, there's some music that almost makes you want to dance, which to me, when I listen to it, it suggests that it's a playful topic for her, and that she has accepted her big feet and she's ready to embrace it. But you'll also notice that there are pauses in the music where it cuts out and there's no music. These times convey uncertainty and maybe that embarrassment or that worry that she has. Is she keeping it short? She has a simple narration. She has quite a few pictures. Some feedback I would give is maybe she can have less pictures. And then there's some various music changes. But overall, I think she has used just enough words and media to tell her story. And I see in the chat box that some of you are saying that it was 1:49, and you are right. So her pacing, her story was definitely short. It was under our 2-minute mark. But you'll also notice that the rhythm of her story was pretty fast, which to me was good and appropriate for her being a student. Students often have a fast-paced life. So that was good pacing, and it was appropriate for the story. But there were also pauses and changes in the pacing. There were points where she stopped and points where she asked the audience a question. These were also good and important for her story. All right, so if you look at your notes in this activity, you should have gotten something like this, right? Her dramatic question: how will she solve the many challenges of living with big feet, from people talking about her to not being able to buy shoes that fit her feet? Okay, we see that her voice is really evident through the story, and she moves from being embarrassed to accepting her big feet. We see that there's music that's appropriate to the mood of the story. Sometimes it's a little too loud, and so that's something that she could improve on too, because we want to make sure that we can hear her voice. And she has good pacing that matches the mood and the rhythm of her story. So if you got these and you were able to locate them, or any of the other ones, good job. So we're going to go to a poll now. In your opinion, which of these elements is the most important for having a successful digital story? In my view, they're all important at some level, but which are the most important, or which are the ones that you would focus on with your students? Good. So I'm seeing many of you have chosen emotional content, but more than that, the dramatic question. And I would agree, having a dramatic question, and that's something you can emphasize with your students, and if you create a story, is making sure that that question is at the beginning, the middle, and the end of your story, and to make sure you don't give the answer away too soon. You want to keep your audience guessing what will happen, what will come next. That's a good element of storytelling. Good job. So we'll go back. All right. So we are to our last point, which is how do I use digital storytelling in my classroom? Well, I would suggest a 5-step process that you can do yourself as you try out digital storytelling, or you might do it with your students. So if you remember, one of the articles that was posted on the resource page on the NING, in the pre-webinar discussion, was an article from English Teaching Forum by Brenner. And she's a teacher, and I think if you haven't read that article, it's a good article to read because it gives the perspective of a first-time teacher working with the tool of digital storytelling. So one of the things she does is she gives a timeline for doing a project like this with your student. She also suggests making a digital story yourself because you learn a lot about telling a story and about using some of the technology resources. She has suggestions for making rubrics and assessing students, as well as dealing with challenges that arise. So if you're a first-time teacher doing this, or a teacher doing digital storytelling for the first time, this is a good place to start. Another thing to think about getting started is to look at some examples. And like I said, to try to make a story yourself. So if you follow these 2 links, they're also on the resource page on the NING. It'll take you to 2 websites that have many different examples of different kinds of digital stories, much like the 2 that we've seen here today. So as you watch more digital stories, you'll get a better idea about how they're organized, and there'll be something that you can do with your students. And I'd suggest, as you watch the videos, to have a viewing guide. So your viewing guide can simply be asking or answering these questions. What kind of story is it? What visuals does it have? What audio does it have? Does it include? Who is the author? And how long is the story? So you could do a simple guide like this, or you could try to identify the elements. If you're watching these as a teacher, this is something you can do for yourself, but you can also have your students do it. I'm doing a digital storytelling project right now with my students, and they are doing both of these things, looking at the definitions of a digital story and answering these questions, as well as considering the elements. All right, so now we're to our basic 5-step process. The first is to have an idea for a digital story and to develop a script. That's where writing comes into play. The second is to collect the digital resources. The third is to storyboard. And we'll talk about each of these and what they are. The fourth is to import and record and to begin editing your video. And the fifth and final step is to share. So we'll look at each of these, and if you look on the web too, you'll find a different amount of steps, but these are 5 basic steps that you can include in your process. All right, so you want to start with an idea. Giving them a task or an assignment is a good way to start. So if you follow this link, The Creative Educator, you'll get some good ideas about how to start this process with your students. So you can click that link here, and it's also available on the resource page on the Ning. But one thing to consider is that using one of the 3 kinds of digital stories that we've talked about already. Personal narrative, like our student example. Our example from the beginning of the webinar, a historical documentary, and using old photographs to tell a historical story. Or you might do a content area tutorial. I know many of you teach math or you teach English for specific purposes, so maybe math or science. And so you can use a digital storytelling process that focuses on English and also maybe a content area topic. So we're going to go to another poll. Oh wait, not yet. Sorry, wait for it. There's one more thing I wanted to mention before the poll, and that's you can do a specific task. So for example, I'm teaching a business English class, and I was trying to brainstorm some tasks that I could have my students do to practice their business English skills. And I came up with these: advertise an event to get people to attend it, showcase a cause and get people to support it, or market a product and get people to buy it. And I chose to do this one, showcase a cause and get people to support it. So you can get creative and do something outside of these three tasks. Okay, so now we'll go to the poll. Okay, so go ahead and answer this question. Which digital storytelling task would you want to try out with your students? Personal narrative, historical documentary, content area tutorial, or a specific task related to your class? Good. So a lot of you have chosen personal narrative, and I would agree that for most English classes in the world, this would be a really good topic to choose. And you could get more specific with your students as well. For example, you could talk about a challenge that they have had to overcome. It could be a physical challenge, just like our example with the girl who talked about her feet. But it could also be an emotional challenge or some other type of challenge. It could be a challenge facing them in school. So you can get more specific within that kind of digital story, the personal narrative. Good. Thanks for answering, guys. We'll go back now. All right. So once you have a task or an idea for the students, the next part is to write the script. So this is a good part where we bring in writing and the writing skill. So you may have heard of the writing process. I think the writing process is a good thing to incorporate into creating a digital story. Particularly the pre-writing, writing, and revision. And so we're going to look at a few activities where we can incorporate that process into our digital storytelling now. Okay, so the first thing is to look again at that rhetorical triangle. You can even give students a triangle and have them identify these aspects of the triangle. The student, right, would be the author, and you want to talk to your students about their perspective. What is their voice? What is the feeling and emotion that they'll bring to their story? Next, you're going to want to look at the audience. Who are they targeting? Who is the digital story for? It might be for you as a teacher to get graded, but who else is going to watch this story? And then what is the purpose of the story? And along with that, the message. What's the message of the story? So identifying these four aspects from the beginning and helping your students do that is a good place to start. Next, you want to talk to your students about the dramatic question. Many of you, right, said that that was one of the most important elements of the story. So giving them a worksheet or having them draw in their notebook before you even get to the digital tools, have them organize their story. So you can give them a mountain diagram or a story arc diagram, much like this one, where we see there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. We see at the beginning we have the author or the voice that's present, as well as the question. As we go through the story, we see that the action increases and then falls back down by the end as the question is answered or resolved. So helping your students write, do a pre-writing activity like this can give them good organization before they even start to write. But of course, you want them to write their script at some point. And as soon as they write their script, they're probably going to need some feedback, maybe from other students or from you as a teacher. And so doing this activity, story circles, is a good activity to help them get that feedback. And this is a good opportunity to maybe look at what kind of vocabulary do they have, if you're targeting specific vocabulary, or if there's a specific grammar point, you can target it in a story circle like this. So what you're doing as a teacher here is you're giving time for students to work in a small group and take turns sharing their story. So at this point, they may have done some writing already. Maybe they did one of the pre-writing activities, or maybe they have a first draft of their script to work with, and they're going to read what they've written to the other people in their group. Then the group members are going to give them feedback. It could be maybe about their pronunciation or their vocabulary, or if they think the dramatic question is good, one of the elements, but they're going to give their feedback. It's also important to know that if you're letting students work in small groups like this, that you've taken them through this process and they know and understand the different steps. And that will free you up as a teacher as well to move around and to offer your feedback as you listen to students sharing in their small groups. And then finally, repetition. Depending on how beneficial this is for your students, you can do it at various stages of the process. So far, we've only looked at writing, and if there's any one thing I know about writing, it's that it takes multiple times to get it right. It takes a lot of practice. So when we write our first draft, we're probably going to need to make some changes. So doing a story circle is a good way to help our students identify what changes are they going to make. All right, so in the, okay, we're going to keep going. The next step is to collect the digital resources. So far we've only looked at writing the story. Now we're going to look at the digital resources. So there's a few options for you here. One is to find photographs and scan them into your computer. If you have access to a scanner, that can be a limitation. Or many of you said that your students have their own mobile devices. Many of these devices have the option of taking pictures. So your students can record their own videos or take their own pictures with their mobile devices. Another option is to have your students search online for photos using Google Images, or maybe go into this link, at Creative Commons, to use pictures that are available without copyright restrictions. And it's a good point if you have students doing this in your class and publishing these digital stories. You want to make sure you're abiding by some of the copyright guidelines. So that's a step that it's important for you to investigate before you do this part with your students. You can also at this time organize your videos and pictures so that they can be easily accessible later. You might organize your photos you might have 3 folders, beginning, middle, and end of the story, to help you spread out and organize the pictures so that you're ready when you get to the later steps in the process. Okay, the next step is storyboard. Okay, now storyboard is when you've taken the written elements and the digital elements and you connect them together. So let's say I have these elements. Okay, I have my dramatic question, I have a problem, I like to bike. So these are maybe the frameworks of a beginning, middle, and end for my story. And then I'm going to write for each picture or each visual that I have, what am I going to say? And what music or sound effects am I going to have? So the goal here, again, is to connect the visuals, the audios, and the written part of your story. And I'm going to give you a few examples of what it might look like. If you have a good artistic student in your class, it might look like something like this. This is not my storyboard, to be sure. But you'll see, if you look at the individual pictures, those are all sequences of the story going from the beginning to the end, left to right, top to bottom, as we see a story unfold. And we see some writing next to each picture that's talking about maybe the narration, the music, or if there's any changes in the angle of the camera. So this is a little bit more professional looking storyboard. But we also have some that are pretty basic. Now this is what mine might look like, where I'm just drawing out how I want the picture to look, and I'm putting in what I'm gonna say and some of the music that I'm going to include for each picture that I show. Or you might have your storyboard on a Google Doc or a word processing software. So it's basically it's up to you and what you think is going to be beneficial to your students. But the main goal again of the storyboard is to connect the visuals, the audio, and the script, the writing that you've done, all together. All right, so before we talk to this next spot, or talk about this next spot, let's look at another poll. What skills have been used so far in the digital storytelling process? Click all that apply. Choose all that apply. So we have the 4 language skills starting off: speaking, listening, reading, and writing, and digital literacy and critical thinking. Okay, so a lot of you guys said speaking and listening, right? So they've definitely been listening. Remember, you can choose all that apply. You don't have to choose just one. They've been speaking in their story circle groups. Keep in mind they've been doing a lot of writing too with writing the script. They've also maybe looked at some examples online. It's the digital literacy. Good. So really, they've been using all of these skills to one degree or another. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We'll go back now. All right. Now when you get to your storyboard's completed, the next step is to deal with some of the technological resources. And while we will share some of these resources on the resource page of the Ning, you have a few options here. Many of you mentioned that mobile devices are something that your students have. They have iPhones or some other smartphone. SoundCloud, for example, is an app that they can download to their phone to record their audio. Audacity is a program that students can download to a computer and use that software to record audio as well. So here at SoundCloud you have an app, and Audacity you have a software program, so two different options for you. I'd also recommend WeVideo, which is a software as well as a web app that you can use to edit your digital stories. There are good tutorials for how to use each of these on the internet, and that's something that we can link you to on the resource page. But a few options here too you have. I know that some teachers have left this responsibility up to the students. They say, my students know how to do this, I'm going to assign it, and I'm going to help them with the language, but I'm going to leave it to them to deal with the technology. Other teachers have brought in a technology resource person if somebody has that job at your high school or university. But what I recommend is trying these out for yourself if you're able to, and seeing if you might be able to support students in this way. And then the final step is, of course, to share your story. You can share your story on social media. You can share your stories in class. But keep in mind that this is optional. It's a good idea to have permission to share students' stories, and it's not a necessary step. More important, I think, is the process that students go through to make their digital stories. But it's also important, I believe, to give them an opportunity to show that they've had success and that they've made a good finished product that everybody can enjoy. All right, so as we close our webinar, I just want a quick review that we've talked about what we've talked about so far. We first looked at why should you use storytelling in the classroom, and we looked at it as a powerful tool. We also, if you remember, looked at the 7 elements. How do I present an effective story? And then finally, we looked at how do I use digital storytelling in my classroom. So some of the things that I wanted to address with you before we go is, if you will, type in the chat box, what do you think some of the benefits are? So we've learned a little bit about this tool, digital storytelling. Go ahead and type, what do you think the benefits are for students? I saw critical thinking. It's interesting for learners. It helps their motivation, good. It boosts their confidence, that's a great one. There's many stories of students improving their confidence through this process. Good, so some of the other ones that I had, much like you, increased student motivation. I don't know if anyone mentioned it extends language activities outside of class. That's a really good one. We want students to use English in class, but also outside of class. And some of the other ones you mentioned. Good job, everyone. Knowing that, though, we know there's also there's many challenges. So you've mentioned these before, but maybe type in the chat box, what are some challenges that you still see? So we're switching type challenges, technology, giving feedback, shyness. Good. Any other challenges? A lot of you are saying technological challenges. Okay. If that's a challenge for you, and I think it is, it is for many people, keep in mind that you can still take your students through the digital storytelling process, and also some of the resources that will connect you to don't require the internet. They're things that you can download and use on your phone. So if you have internet access problems at school, there's some solutions to that. But I'd also encourage you to check our Ning discussion afterwards and our post-webinar discussion to see if we can talk about how you can overcome some of these challenges. All right, so I would remind you in closing of our guiding question: how can I use digital storytelling in my classroom? We're going to go to our last poll, which looks at what are your next steps. Okay, so what will be your next step in exploring whether digital story products are a good fit for your classroom? Okay, so many of you are putting learn more about the software or tech tools I would need to create stories. So for sure, check out our resource page in the Ning later on today in our discussion, and I'll give you more resources that you can use. A lot of you said to look at more examples. That's also a good next step, as well as making your own digital stories. You'll learn a lot if you try to make your own, and you'll go through what your students are going to go through. So I'd encourage you all to try to make your own as well and see if it's something that will fit. All right, everyone, thank you for choosing a next step. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. So I'd like to thank you all for being attentive. If you have any questions for me, you can find me on the post-webinar discussion on the Ning. I'll be posting some questions for you, and I look forward to talking to you guys on the Ning and seeing you at some point in the future. Good luck with digital storytelling. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Eric, for helping us explore the digital storytelling medium. I think we all do now have a better understanding of this genre. And you also did provide us some really helpful tips on coaching our students through the story development process, as well as some of the language learning and 21st century skill development opportunities that digital storytelling projects can afford. We do look forward to the post-webinar discussion and to exploring your Ning resource page. So thank you again, Eric. We'd also like to say a big thank you to you, our audience, for your active participation today. We do look forward to learning with you again in 2 weeks on November 1st as we learn about understanding documentation and draft writing for business English with Ben Taylor.